horrible. The future looks bleak. Remember our childhood to get us through the week. We're getting re-enthused. Back to the past and the things we used. We all know that our pasts were great, escaping the things that today we hate. Getting re-enthused, getting re-enthused, getting re-enthused, getting re-enthused.
NEC's contribution to the console world is largely forgotten now, which is a real shame because they produced some of the most compelling consoles of the 8-bit and 16-bit eras with some genuinely great games. NEC started in Japan in 1898. Yes, that's 1898. They were known then as the Nippon Electric Company and largely worked on the telephone systems, both the infrastructure and the actual telephone handsets themselves, intending to ship these overseas with their American partners. But this is way before the time we're interested in, so we'll just fast forward to the 1980s. The Nippon Electric Company rebranded itself to just its initials, NEC, as we know them today, and that was basically to help with international sales, to kind of give them like a more generic name. They were one of the major players in the burgeoning PC market in their native Japan and wanted to try and branch this overseas. Now, NEC were always on the lookout for new markets to enter, and seeing the rise of consoles thanks to Nintendo and Sega, they partnered with an up-and-coming gaming group called Hudson Soft, licensed some hardware designs from them, and created their first entry into the console world, the PC Engine, in 1987. It was later rebranded as the TurboGrafx-16 for the US market in 1989, and later in parts of Europe, although in a fairly restricted manner. Now, 1987 was quite a few years after the initial 8-bit console era officially started, so despite being technically an 8-bit console, the PC Engine is marked as heralding the 16-bit era. And it worked. The PC Engine was powerful enough that it not only blew away the incumbent NES and Master System consoles, but it could also hold its own when the 16-bit consoles first arrived. So let's take a look at this first player in NEC's campaign. This is the European TurboGrafx-16. It has an 8-bit CPU and HUC 6280. This CPU is actually an enhanced version of the MOS Technology 6502, the processor that powered the C64 and also uses a base for the CPU in the NES. This is the reason why the PC Engine is considered an 8-bit console. However, it also had a few more chips. These were both the reason it could be claimed to be a 16-bit console and the reason it was able to compete with the SNES and Mega Drive for so long. These were a 16-bit video color encoder and also a 16-bit video display controller. You could kind of consider it as an early GPU. Between them, the PC Engine was capable of displaying 482 colours simultaneously out of a palette of 512. These colours could be split between background and sprites, and this compared incredibly well with the 16-bit consoles. You'll probably also see from the video that there's only one game port. Yep, for more than one player you needed the multitap. Unlike other consoles where the multitap really was only needed if you wanted more than two, you could only play one player out of the box. This was a huge downside to the range. The console itself was quite compact, helped in part by the credit card sized games cartridges, nicknamed Hue cards, after Hudson Soft, whose design they were. The Japanese version you can see here was especially small. Eventually, NEC released a CD-ROM add-on for the PC Engine. It was moderately successful, probably more so than the Mega CD from Sega for instance. The console itself was largely a flop in the US and Europe, although this has been blamed on the lack of a marketing push. In Europe especially, the console was quite hard to buy and was rarely advertised. In Japan, however, the console was incredibly successful, meaning Sega was relegated to third place for a fairly long time in their home country. Because the console was deemed to be a home-only product, NEC didn't really invest a lot of money in the line, most are releasing cosmetic updates. This, for instance, is the TurboGrafx Duo. It's basically the TurboGrafx merged with the Super CD add-on. There's also a PC Engine Duo, of course, for the Japanese market, and I personally love it. The NEC consoles are some of my favourites to start with, and I think this just looks great. They also released the PC Engine LT, a portable PC Engine with an LCD screen, and in 1990 they released a handheld version to compete with the Game Boy. It used the exact same hue cards as the home consoles, and it was amazing, although the screen is quite poor. Eventually the newer designs of the SNES and Mega Drive started to pull ahead as developers got to grips with hardware, and NEC realised they had to do something to compete, so they released this. The NEC Super Graphics. Really, it's just a slightly beefed up TurboGrafx, but I'm drawn to its slightly industrial futuristic design. It didn't sell well and only a few games were ever released to take advantage of the extra capabilities, but it could use the existing hue cards and with the Super CD add-on could use the entire library. This is actually my kind of daily driver for PC Engine games because even though there aren't many Super Graphics games, it does mean I have access to all of them. With the advent of the 32-bit era, NEC realised that its platform that had successfully performed throughout the 8 and 16-bit eras would not be able to compete with the PlayStation and Saturn. Unfortunately, when faced with the 3D and CD equipped next generation consoles, NEC for some reason assumed the most important thing to add would be CD capabilities. So they released the PCFX. It's a kind of mini tower shaped console with a CD tray on top. Unlike its previous consoles, the PCFX was completely incompatible with the hue cards and CD library of the previous ones. Due to its lack of proper 3D support, it did not do well, and so very few games, outside of hentai, were released. It was really good at 2D though. The console was based on a true 32-bit RISC CPU, the NEC V810. Quite a powerful CPU really. And whilst the console had no polygon processor, and hence the reason why it couldn't do 3D, it did have pretty good motion decompression. This allowed it to show good quality MPEG files and also to decompress JPEG files quickly. NEC assumed developers would be using pre-rendered graphics a la Donkey Kong Country rather than 3D polygons. They were very wrong. I like the look of the PCFX, but it's definitely my least used console. Although I do quite like the controller, it's pretty comfortable. It feels a lot like the Saturn one actually. And so NEC left the console market. They did continue working with PCs, now IBM PC compatible rather than the Japan only PC98 standard. And their partner and creator of some truly fantastic games, including the legendary Bomberman, Hudson Soft, were merged into Konami. So what about those games? The PC Engine had some truly amazing arcade ports and is especially well known for shoot 'em ups. So here are some of my favourites. I couldn't do a list of games on the PC Engine without mentioning Bonk. It's a scrolling platformer with a bunch of character. So much character in fact that Bonk is largely regarded as the mascot of the platform. There were 3 games in the series: Bonk's Adventure, Bonk's Revenge and Bonk's Big Adventure. They're all good games, but the original is still my favourite. And of course, talking about it means I get to say Bonk quite a lot. Again, I have to mention Bomberman. Although Hudson Soft originally created it for the MSX, the PC Engine is considered its true home. It's just a fun game, especially with more than one player, although obviously requiring the multi-tap as mentioned before. A run and gun game, sort of like Contra. It's well placed and it's fairly frantic shooter with bags of fun. It's got some issues, as you'll probably see in the video, especially when driving vehicles, but it's an overall good game. Port of the Taito arcade RPG-like hack and slash game. It was ported to other machines, the Mega Drive especially, but this was by far the best port. One of the many great shoot 'em ups on the platform. I've limited myself to 2 in this list, which was really hard, but the video would go on for far too long if I hadn't. I'm not a huge fan of arcade pinball games, but this one is imaginative, characterful and just fun. If you've played Advance Wars on the Game Boy, you'll probably see similarities here, and it plays somewhat the same. It's basically a simplified strategy game. It's pretty fast and it's quite fun. The other shoot 'em up on this list, and one of my favourite games on the platform. It's frantic and fast without being the bullet hell style of shooter, plus it looks pretty great. A very Zelda-like game, very Zelda-like in fact. But it has its own character and, in my opinion, nicer graphics than the game it was inspired by. So, collecting the turbo graphics. It's pretty easy nowadays. You can get turbo graphics or PC engines relatively cheap. The European versions are a bit hard to get hold of, but the benefit of that obviously is if you are in Europe, you don't have to worry about step down converters and such like, although you can get third-party power supplies now, so you can do away with those altogether if you don't mind using them. The games are quite well priced as well. There's a few which go for higher prices, but mostly you can get some fairly good deals on them, especially the CD ones. Bear in mind though, region locking is implemented. There are mods out there, but you can't just sling a US game in a European console. Unfortunately, the various CD consoles and CD add-ons tend to be pricier and harder to get. It's a shame because there are some great CD games, and not playing them you kind of miss out on a fair few classics on the system. The Ys Adventure series especially being great. The Super Graphics and PCFX, they're hard to get. The PCFX actually less so, even though it was Japan only. But this is not a genuinely great loss. The Super Graphics games, and there were only 6, aren't especially stand out. Darius Plus is nice, but there are so many other great shooters on the TurboGrafx that you won't really miss it. And the PCFX didn't really have anything great at all. It's, say, unless you're really into hentai games, and if you are, then it might be the machine for you, to be fair, because they're, like most Japanese consoles that fail in their home country, it did kind of end up being the place for hentai games. So that's it. Thanks for watching. The NEC consoles, they're some of my favourites. I genuinely love them. The TurboGrafx is the machine I go back to more than any other retro machine that I own. Well, specifically the Super Graphics, just so I've got the extra access. Although, I'll be fair, I don't play any Super Graphics games. They're not great. There are ROM solutions available. There's the Turbo Everdrive by Crix, which it works incredibly well. I prefer owning the games just because I like owning them, but there are games you just cannot get hold of or are priced at a level where they're impossible to get. But generally I've got so many games for the TurboGrafx that I don't need to use it. Yeah, I mean, if you're into retro games, I genuinely believe it's a good one to get. It's easily collectible, pretty much. It's a lot more collectible than some of the other machines. And it's fun, it's worth playing. It's one of those machines you don't stick in a cupboard, you actually do play. So again, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. If you didn't like the video, then please at least leave a comment to say why without just hitting dislike. And thanks.